Two alien rivals captured me. Now they're fighting over who gets me first. Rylan inhales sharply, eyes flicking open to a snowy expanse that burns white-hot with the reflected glare of a pale sun. Chains bite into his bare wrists, rusted, metal scoring his skin whenever he moves. The cold stings across his chest, stiffening every muscle to the point of painful tension, but he refuses to bow his head in defeat. Frost clings to the ends of his long dreadlocks, woven tight over his broad shoulders. He can feel the chill all the way to his scalp, but he stays impossibly still, every instinct on high alert. He registers the rattle of chains more clearly than the voices warring over him, two clashing tones crackling on the sharp wind. One voice is low and rough, a sensual purr beneath the words that brings an electric hum to the air. The other is harsh, nearly feral, carrying a coil of menace that makes the back of his neck prickle. He doesn't need to see them yet to know they are alien and dangerous. He can feel it in the way the atmosphere trembles with their presence. Though he has no weapon, no freedom, Rylan is no helpless prisoner. A lifetime of battles taught him that the edge of fear can be wielded, but he's chained, cornered. The advantage is theirs, for now. He senses movement, the crunch of boots on the snow. He angles his head just enough to see them properly. One stands at his left, tall and elegant, her skin a luminous shade of green that seems to capture the faint sunlight and reflect it in shimmering undertones. Her silver-white hair moves like liquid silk across the sharp lines of her shoulders. She wears leather and metal that cling to her curves, functional armor with an alien artistry to it, every piece designed to be both protective and seductive. When her eyes swing in his direction, the color shifts from metallic silver to a deep, rich emerald. The sight is both disconcerting and enthralling. To his right, the second figure prowls like a caged predator. Her hair is red as flame, braided in places but mostly wild, framing a face that seems designed for battle, beautiful yet fierce. Beneath a fitted corset-like top, her physique is all honed muscle, built to endure. Her eyes burn a coppery gold, narrowing in the direction of the green-skinned rival, as though just looking at her stokes a hatred that runs deep. She carries a sheathed blade at her hip, but one hand has a death grip on the hilt, ready to draw at a moment's provocation. Rylan has seen conflict on countless worlds, but these two exude a primal tension that bristles with lethal potential. The rivalry is palpable, curling around him as if their animosity is the only heat in the frozen air. Even as they argue, their gazes keep sliding back to him, each wanting ownership of this new prize. He grinds his teeth, refusing to speak. First, if he's going to be fought over, he wants to see who among them has the upper hand. The silver-haired one, Kael'ari she calls herself, moves closer, her steps graceful. With a dismissive flick of her wrist, she gestures at the chains coiled around his arms and torso, as if acknowledging that, yes, she placed them there. Rylan notices something like a faint aura around her skin, a hint of latent energy that crackles in the frigid air. Selis, the fiery-haired warrior, stands just as tall, though her stance is bolder, almost confrontational. She addresses Kael'ari with a sneer. The words come in an alien tongue first, then shift into a more common language, as though some advanced translator hovers between them. You think because you found him first, he's yours alone. That's not how conquest works. Kael'ari lifts her chin, a smouldering amusement twisting her lips. I captured him. I bound him. I decide what's to become of him. Selis's mouth curves into a mocking grin. Then I'll just have to take him from you. Rylan tenses, lifting his gaze fully to assess them both. Two alien warlords, both assured of their dominion, locked in a silent battle of wills. He can feel the tension coil in his gut. Beneath different circumstances, he might exploit it more easily. But with his arms tethered in these rusted links, his options remain limited. He's spent half his life escaping impossible prisons. He's not about to give up because of a frostbite. Selis shifts forward, dropping to a half-crouch, her eyes roving across his bare chest as if appraising the strength in his frame. The look she gives him is carnivorous. "Look at him," she taunts, turning partway toward Kael'ari, but her gaze drags across Rylan's body with slow intensity. "You think he'll just bow for you? He's a warrior. I see it in his eyes." Kael'ari snorts softly, the purr beneath her voice turning dangerous. "I want him to bow, but not necessarily in submission." She steps closer, and Rylan feels the faint pulse of energy that flows off her. Her greenish skin seems to catch the sunlight, shimmering where it clings to the lines of her arms, which are partly encased in stylized metal braces. He's not broken. That makes him worth more. I admire that kind of resilience. Rylan clenches his jaw. He doesn't want to speak, to reveal anything. Let them think he's just a captured soldier from some lost battlefield, even if the truth is far more complicated. A gust of freezing wind rips across the mountain pass, blowing the swirling snow into a fresh flurry. Both women tense at the same moment, tilting their heads as if they've heard something. Then Rylan hears it, the distant thrum of battle cruisers echoing in the icy air. Not just one or two ships, but a small fleet moving fast. He tries to place the sound, deciphering. The hum of engines. He knows starship frequencies. These are heavy cruisers. Trouble is coming. Kael'ari and Selis lock gazes. Their hatred is real, but whatever mutual enemy approaches is an even bigger threat. Without a word, they move in unison, drawing closer. To Rylan, Selis points toward the ridgeline. "We need to move." Kael'ari reaches down, grabs the chains, and with a jerk that's surprisingly strong for her lithe form, hoists Rylan onto his feet. He staggers, forced to stand, but he grits his teeth and doesn't cry out. He notes the strength in her slender arms, wonders if her entire species carries such innate power. Selis eyes the chains with a combination of disdain and desire. She reaches out and grips the links, adding a slight yank that makes Rylan's muscles strain again. "It'd be easier to run if we unchain him." She glances back at Kael'ari with a crooked grin. "Or maybe you like dragging him along. Your funeral if he slows us down." Kael'ari flicks her gaze over Rylan's body, like a hawk deciding whether to let a captive falcon free to hunt or keep it tethered. The silence stretches for a moment. Then she produces a small device from her belt. With a hiss, the chains around Rylan's arms release, leaving only the collar and a short length of chain around his neck. He catches the length of it, registering that the collar is locked tight. No easy way to slip out of it, but at least his arms are free. He makes no sudden moves yet. Two formidable warriors, both armed, stand inches away, and though he's an expert soldier, he's no fool. Attack now, and he'll be cut down before he can escape. So he takes a deep breath, ignoring the biting cold, and squares his shoulders. Selis flicks her gaze up to the leaden sky. "We don't have much time. The Fresier warlords must have tracked us here." She looks to Kael'ari. "Just our luck that we run into each other in the open like this." Kael'ari shrugs, turning on a heel. "We'll keep moving. The pass leads to a series of canyons. If they follow us there, we can pick them off in smaller groups." A faint smirk curls her lips as she eyes Selis. "You can fight, right? Or do you just posture?" Selis snorts, the expression making her feral beauty even sharper. "Try to keep up, oh, queen of illusions." She sets off at a brisk pace, the snow crunching under her boots. Kael'ari gestures for Rylan to follow, letting him walk ahead, but maintaining a firm grip on the short length of chain attached to his collar. He can feel the tension there, a silent reminder that he's still her captive. The dynamic between them is precarious. Though she's not pressing a blade to his throat, the presence of that chain and Selis's watchful glare is enough to keep him from making a reckless move. They begin a swift trek across the ridgeline, occasionally crouching low when the wind gusts to avoid being seen from above. Rylan's bare arms soon grow numb from the cold, but he clenches and unclenches his fists, driving blood into his forearms to keep them functional. The pain is a constant burn, one he channels into focus. He's been in worse situations, though not many. The thought is oddly comforting. He looks at the two alien women, both exude unstoppable will. He wonders which one might kill the other first, if given the chance. As they descend into a rocky gorge, the howling wind eases. The towering walls of ice and stone loom on either side, creating a corridor that channels the wind into ghostly moans. They trudge forward, tensions high, until Kael'ari suddenly raises a hand for silence. Selis halts instantly, scanning their surroundings. Rylan, not wanting to be the fool who draws attention, crouches with them, his collar rattling softly when he moves. For a brief moment, no one speaks. Then Rylan hears it. A rumble, subtle at first, followed by a flicker of shadow overhead. Kael'ari's eyes flash bright emerald, her body coiling as she presses against the rocky wall for cover. Selis does the same on the opposite side, motioning for Rylan to stay low. A trio of large vessels passes overhead, their engines shaking, the air with ominous power. They have a distinct shape, reminiscent of triangular wings. Rylan has encountered similar warships on the outlying worlds where empires fight for territory. He curses under his breath. If these are Fresier ships, they won't hesitate to scorch the entire canyon if they suspect infiltration. They wait with bated breath as the ships pass by without slowing. The tension in Kael'ari's posture shifts slightly, but she doesn't relax. Selis glances at Rylan with a gaze that might border on curiosity. "You're not trembling, like the usual captives," she whispers, her tone clipped but laced with intrigue. "Either you're brave or very foolish." He meets her eyes. "I'm not used to trembling, no matter the situation." Selis's lips curl into a faint smirk. Kael'ari quietly tugs on the chain, not enough to choke, but enough to remind Rylan of his place. "Keep that spirit," she murmurs, leaning in close, her voice a feather against his ear. "I want to see how long it lasts." They press on, navigating twisting pathways carved by ancient glaciers. The deeper they go, the darker the sky overhead becomes, until the canyon walls nearly blot out the pale sunlight. The temperature plummets further. Ice crystals form on Kael'ari's lashes, on the tips of Selis's red hair, across the metal links of Rylan's collar. With each step, the tension between Kael'ari and Selis grows, as if the claustrophobic passage amplifies their smoldering. Rivalry. At one turn they come face to face with a squad of armored soldiers bearing the insignia of the Fresier warlords. There's no time for negotiation or ambush. The four soldiers see them at once, weapons raised. Kael'ari and Selis react in a blur. Selis's blade is out first, a humming plasma edge that crackles as it tears through the chest plate of the nearest soldier. The man collapses in a spray of sparks and a guttural cry. Kael'ari lunges with a spinning kick, slamming another. Soldier against the canyon wall, her braces glinting as she twists and crushes the man's windpipe with practiced efficiency. Rylan flinches away from the chain so he can use his freed arms. He ducks under the muzzle of a rifle aimed at him, grabs the soldier's arm, and jerks it down. Even unarmed, Rylan's a well-trained combatant. He slams his fist into the soldier's throat, then wrenches the weapon away. A bullet or energy bolt might cause an echo in these walls that draws more enemies, so he quickly turns the rifle around in a single smooth motion, butt first, and smashes it into the soldier's face. He drops like a stone, unconscious or worse. Selis dispatches the final soldier with a savage backhand, her plasma blade cutting through armor as though it were wet parchment. The man barely makes a sound before collapsing. Blood steams in the icy air. Selis throws Rylan a sly grin as If grudgingly impressed by his skill, Kael'ari's eyes flicker from silver to bright emerald. Her breathing is quick, the adrenaline swirling around her like a tangible aura. Rylan gets the sense that the scent of battle arouses her, that she relishes the fight as much as Selis does, albeit with more finesse. Kael'ari turns to him, studying the chain in her hand. "You fight well for a captive." He shrugs. "I've fought for most of my life. Where I come from, it's adapt or die." Selis wipes her blade on the armor of one of the fallen soldiers, standing with a fluid grace. "Let him fight, unless you're too afraid to lose your pretty trophy." Kael'ari's gaze smolders, but she doesn't rise to the bait. She steps toward Rylan, lifts a small key from her belt, and unlocks the collar. The weight of the chain slides off him. The thick metal clinks onto the snow, leaving only a faint red mark where it chafed his neck. He rolls his shoulders, ignoring, the ache in his muscles meeting Kael'ari's steady stare. "Don't think you're free," Kael'ari warns softly. "I'm simply making use of an asset." Rylan rubs the spot where the collar was. "That's an improvement." Selis's laugh is low, laced with a taunt. "We'll see how long that lasts. Come on, more will be swarming here soon." They break into a jog, navigating deeper into the canyon. Rylan stays close, the stolen rifle in his hands. He can feel the tension between Kael'ari and Selis as clearly as he can see the snow swirling around them. It's in every sidelong glance, every slight shift in posture. Both are used to absolute dominance, yet they're forced to cooperate. Meanwhile, Rylan is the singular point of contention, the reason they haven't killed each other yet. He senses that if not for him, they might have done so long ago. The canyon gradually widens, revealing a hidden valley cradled between steep cliffs of ice-laced rock. Rylan notices lumps in the snow, half-buried structures that might once have been outposts or bunkers. Kael'ari steps cautiously, scanning for threats. Selis, more direct, strides ahead, flicking her gaze around with predatory sharpness. Without warning, a barrage of weapons fire hammers down from the cliff above. Energy beams scorch the snow, erupting it into plumes of steaming water. A chunk of rock shatters near Selis's feet, sending sharp fragments in every direction. Rylan dives behind a partially collapsed wall, Kael'ari and Selis joining him in the temporary cover. The sizzling bolts illuminate the gloom in rapid flashes. "There must be a nest of them up there," Kael'ari hisses, pressing her back too. "The wall. We can't outrun them in the open. We have to flush them out." Selis smirks, apparently exhilarated by the challenge. "Allow me," she purrs, brandishing her blade as she peers over the rubble. Another volley forces her back down, cursing. "All right, maybe not straight up the middle." Rylan checks the stolen rifle for charge. It's nearly depleted, but he can probably get a few shots off. "I can lay down cover fire." Kael'ari's eyes blaze that bright emerald again. "Then do it. Selis, you flank from the left. I'll take the right. Don't let them pin you down." Selis doesn't wait for permission. She's already launching herself over the rubble, rolling into a bank of snow. The hail of beams follows her, but she's too quick, sprinting along. The cliff's base. Rylan peeks around the edge of the broken wall, spots 3 or 4 silhouettes perched on the upper ledges, firing heavy rifles. He squeezes off a shot, forcing them to duck. Kael'ari vaults nimbly over a block of ice, her metallic braces deflecting a stray bolt. She seems to harness some kind of pulsing energy in her palms, launching it at the enemy. A searing burst of light arcs upward, and Rylan hears a scream as at least one figure tumbles from the ledge, crashing out of sight. He bobs out of cover again, taking aim at a soldier who's leaning precariously over the ledge to get a shot. Rylan's blast tears through the soldier's shoulder, sending him spinning backward. More figures appear. It's a small detachment, but well positioned. They return fire with renewed fury, and Rylan ducks, feeling the heat of an energy bolt sear the stone near his face. He mutters under his breath, hearing his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. Selis's movement draws his attention. She clambers up a narrow ledge, pressing close to the rock face for cover. When one of the enemy leans out to target her, she hooks her foot under his boot, yanking him off balance. He crashes down with a strangled yelp, landing so close to Rylan that the snow around him billows in a white explosion. Rylan leaps forward, snapping the rifle butt across the soldier's helmet. The soldier goes limp, and Rylan quickly strips him of a fresh plasma pistol. A shriek echoes off the cliffs, and Rylan sees that Kael'ari has reached the top, grappling with two more foes. Even from below, he can tell she's lethal, weaving around their attacks with fluid agility, her bracers flashing with arcs of crackling energy. She lands a series of vicious blows that send them stumbling. Selis also appears at the top, her red hair a flurry of movement as she stabs one soldier through the gut, then swings around to slice at the other. It's merciless, relentless. Within minutes, the last soldier falls silent. Kael'ari stands, at the edge, chest heaving, surveying the scene with narrowed eyes. Selis stands a few feet away, panting, blade dripping with what must be the remains of their opponents. The wind tears at both of them, carrying the tang of scorched metal and ozone from the energy blasts. Rylan climbs up to join them, carefully, stepping over the bodies. The view from the top is stark, a stretch of endless frozen plain beyond the canyon, dotted with patches of rock. In the distance, the blocky silhouettes of more Fresier gunships drift low in the sky. They're probably scanning for heat signatures or life forms. Selis wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, eyeing Kael'ari. We can't stay exposed on this ridge. We need a place to regroup. She glances at Rylan. Your soldier. Training? Do you know any vantage point we could use to get out of their scanning range? He looks out over the terrain. I don't know this planet, but if we can find something that disrupts their scanners, like a cave system or underground facility, then we might hide our signatures. The outposts below might be connected by tunnels. Kael'ari exhales, her breath turning to white vapor. Let's check, but we have to move fast. She kneels, rummaging in the satchels of one of the fallen soldiers, emerging with a small scanning device. With a few quick taps, she frowns. A wide sweep of the area is already underway. We have minutes at best. Selis nods and leaps, back onto the rough path down the cliff. Rylan follows, carefully lowering himself. The adrenaline still pulses through his veins, and he notes how every muscle in his body feels warmed by the battle, even in this frigid environment. Kael'ari descends last, graceful despite the steep drop. When they reach the base, she wordlessly tosses the scanning device to Rylan, as if silently entrusting him with the data. He checks the readout. One area near the center of the valley shows an anomaly, possibly a structure beneath the ice. That might be our best bet, he says, turning the screen so they can see it. It's about 1 kilometer southeast. Selis takes off immediately, her footsteps carving deep prints in the snow. Kael'ari and Rylan hurry to match her pace. As they run, Rylan's mind churns with possibilities. He's still not sure why he was captured in the first place. He was on a covert mission to gather intel on the power struggles raging across this sector. Then something went wrong. Kael'ari ambushed him, or at least her forces did. Now he's trapped in the middle of a bigger conflict, forced to ally with not one, but 2 warlords who might kill each other at any moment. Worse, they each seem determined to claim him somehow, as if he's a trophy or perhaps a resource. They cross the valley under low cover, weaving between blocks of ice and scattered debris. The snow's slickness almost makes Rylan stumble, more than once. But Selis catches his elbow once, Kael'ari another time. Each touch is brisk, purposeful, with an underlying heat. He's not sure if the warmth in his gut is from the fight or from the knowledge that these two are not just lethal but impossibly enticing. They radiate a fierce magnetism, opposing forces locked in an endless clash. The clash now centers on him. At last, they reach a half-buried structure. Close up, Rylan can see it's made from some alloy, old and weathered. There's a faint insignia carved into the metal near a collapsed doorway, but the letters are too eroded to read. Selis shoulders the door open, her raw strength bending the warped metal enough for them to slip inside. The space beyond is dark, musty, and frigid, but at least it's sheltered from the wind. Kael'ari activates a small orb that glows with cool light, illuminating a corridor that slopes downward. The walls are lined with pipes and cables, many of which have snapped or rusted away. A faint hiss echoes in the still air. Selis moves forward without hesitation, scanning for threats. Kael'ari and Rylan follow, stepping carefully around debris. The corridor leads to a larger chamber, part workshop, part armory, with racks that once held weapons, now mostly looted or decayed. A flicker of disappointment crosses Selis's face, but Kael'ari pokes around the corners until she finds a console. She tries to power it up. The screen buzzes, flickers with static, then goes blank again. Dead, she mutters. No power left here. We might be able to patch something together if we find a generator. Selis's attention drifts to Rylan, who stands near a battered metal table, gripping the edges as he tries to catch his breath. She notices the raw bruises on his wrists and neck from the chains, the gooseflesh on his bare arms. She steps closer, her wild red hair tumbling over her shoulder. For a moment, the harshness in her eyes softens to curiosity. You need clothing. She points out, her voice a half-growl. Or you'll freeze. He straightens. I've survived worse. Kael'ari passes by, her gaze traveling over his torso. He can't help but feel both exposed and oddly triumphant that he's endured this long. She bites her lower lip thoughtfully, then produces a folded, fur-lined cloak from her pack, tossing it at him. Put that on. You're no good to me if you die from the cold. He snags it from midair. The inside is soft, warm, though the outside is a leather-like material that's rough to the touch. He slides into it, feeling some relief as it traps what heat remains in his body. Selis leans against the wall, arms crossed, eyes never leaving him. Kael'ari fiddles with a tool from her belt, moving toward a half-disassembled generator in the corner. Rylan glances between them, the tension so thick he can almost taste it. How did the two of you end up here together? He finally asks, wanting some measure of clarity. Kael'ari meets his question with a wry smile, her eyes flicking from silver to emerald as if reading his intent. We weren't together. I caught you first, but apparently Selis was on my trail. Selis snorts. You stole something precious from my domain. I tracked you across half the galaxy to reclaim it, or at least to spill your blood. Instead, I found you playing warden to this spirited soldier. Kael'ari moves to crouch near him, the generator's components spread out at her feet. You might want to ask her what I stole, she says over her shoulder, her tone laced with amusement. She won't admit it. Selis's jaw sets, the tension in her posture coiling like a spring. She shoots Kael'ari a glare but doesn't. Elaborate, shifting her attention to Rylan. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that Kael'ari's days of claiming everything in her path are numbered. Kael'ari's laughter is low, silky, echoing in the metal chamber, and yet here you are, cooperating, because you want the same thing I do, a chance to get off this frozen rock alive. She twists a valve on the generator. There's a spark, a flicker of light, then a faint hum as a few emergency lights flicker overhead. Ah, there! The partial power reveals more of the chamber, a side door leading to a storeroom, and a large table that might have been for strategic planning. Selis prowls around the space, occasionally shooting Kael'ari and Rylan glances that bristle with danger and a hint of something else. Interest, perhaps. Rylan can't shake the feeling that the two warlords aren't just after his capture for leverage. There's a hunger in their eyes, something that flares every time they look at him or each other. He sets the newly powered console to scan for life signs in the area. The device sputters, flickers, then produces a crude topographic map of the region. Faint pulses indicate scattered units of Freya soldiers. They're closing in. We've maybe an hour before they reach this valley in full force. Kael'ari stands, wiping grime from her hands. We should fortify. If there's an underground tunnel or additional exit, we can use that to either escape or ambush them. Selis, meanwhile, steps close to Rylan. He senses the heat radiating off her body. She tilts her head, her red hair falling to one side. "You're good in a fight, better than most. I'm curious about where you trained." He gives a dry chuckle, meeting her intense gaze. "All over. Served in 100 skirmishes, a dozen wars. I've lost count." Her lips quirk in a half-smile. "You speak like a man who's seen too much but doesn't break from it." She lifts a hand, brushing a fingertip near the raw ring of chafed skin around his neck. Her touch is surprisingly gentle, yet a current of aggression simmers beneath it. You should find something to patch that up. Infection kills as easily as a sword. Kael'ari observes them from the corner of her eye while she rummages through more crates. There's a current of jealousy or rivalry there. Rylan can't quite tell which, perhaps both. He moves away from Selis's proximity, focusing on the storeroom. He locates a few outdated med packs, rummages through them. For a salve. The packaging is brittle with age, but the substance inside might still work. He applies it carefully to the worst of the abrasions on his wrists and neck, wincing slightly at the sting. A flicker of awareness runs down his spine when he senses Kael'ari stepping behind him, silent as a stalking cat. He turns his head, enough to see her, noting again the elegant lines of her face, the proud tilt of her chin. Her eyes roam over him as if evaluating a new battlefield, searching for any weakness. There's a faint curve to her lips, not quite a smile. She lifts a hand, pressing it gently against his shoulder, and a muted warmth pulses from her palm. He almost jerks away, uncertain whether it's a threat. "You're healing well," she murmurs, her voice low, layered with that purr that seems to reverberate in his chest. "That salve is archaic, but with your resilience it will do." He nods, swallowing the dryness in his throat. Her presence is intoxicating in a different way than Selis's primal aura. Kael'ari is a lethal, stealthy hunter. Selis is a raging tempest. Both want him, both see him as a prize. Yet there's a subtle shift in how Kael'ari's fingers trace the edge of a newly forming bruise on his shoulder. It's as if she's testing the boundaries between them. He can sense her interest, her desire to claim. A crashing sound from the corridor breaks the moment. Selis has kicked open another door, letting in a rush of cold air and swirling snow. She tosses a half-broken pipe aside. "There's a sub-level," she announces, waving Kael'ari and Rylan closer. "But it's flooded with ice and rubble. We won't be going that way easily." She levels a heated look at Kael'ari. "If you have any more of that magic of yours, you might melt through." Kael'ari's expression hardens. "It's not magic, it's harnessed energy, and I don't plan on exhausting myself unless it's necessary." Selis crosses her arms under her chest, leaning forward slightly, a challenge in her eyes. "I see. You're saving yourself for him, perhaps." Rylan steps in before the tension boils over into violence. "We need to figure out if we can even hold this place. The Freya are approaching. You two want to kill each other, fine, but not now. We need a plan." Selis's gaze snaps to him. For an instant he wonders if she'll lash out, but instead she chuckles. He's got a warrior's spirit. "Kael'ari, you sure you can handle him?" Kael'ari angles her head, the silver in her eyes darkening to emerald again. "I'm more than capable of handling both of you." Something sparks between them, like a fuse igniting. Rylan exhales a breath, stepping back to the console. He adjusts the sensor range, verifying the positions of the approaching squads. We might have to make our stand here. They'll send a scouting party first. If we deal with them quietly, maybe the larger force will pass us by. Selis cracks, her knuckles as though anticipating the fight. I could use a fresh kill. Kael'ari sets her jaw. We'll have to coordinate or we'll be overrun. They have better numbers. Selis squares her shoulders, rolling them until the tightness in her muscles eases. There's a subtle hint of excitement in her tone. Let them come. In the following minutes, they scout vantage points within the base. The large chamber near the entrance can serve as a choke point, forcing any intruders into a narrow corridor. Kael'ari and Selis quickly argue over who gets the best position to strike first, and Rylan finds himself stepping in as a mediator, reminding them that working together might actually yield a chance of survival. They arrange improvised barricades with scrap metal and fallen beams. Rylan sets a few tripwire traps using old cables and the stored energy cells he salvaged from the generator room. Kael'ari works carefully with him, her slender fingers glimmering with that faint aura of contained power. Several times her hand brushes his, and a jolt of warmth travels through his arm, a testament to how her body reacts to close contact. It leaves him off balance, a tingle that draws his focus more than he cares to admit. Selis, meanwhile, prowls the perimeter like a restless predator, checking every possible weakness. She paces, eyes flashing with a primal hunger for battle. At one point, she returns to the main chamber and finds Kael'ari perched atop a fallen column, calibrating a stolen rifle. Selis arches an eyebrow, approaching with silent steps. "You're not the type for conventional weapons," she says, running a hand along the column, leaning against it with a lazy confidence. "Losing your edge, Kael'ari?" Kael'ari barely lifts her gaze. "I adapt, unlike you who charges in head first and calls it victory." Selis's lips part in a dangerous smile. "Careful. Charging in head first is how I claimed half. The galaxies in the outer rim. Don't underestimate what a direct assault can do, especially when it's delivered with enough force." Kael'ari's eyes flick to Rylan, who's crouched by another makeshift barricade, watching them both. With guarded curiosity, direct force has its uses, she admits in a softer tone, but so does strategy and patience. Rylan almost laughs at the word patience. Neither of them seems patient in any sense. They're volcanoes, swirling with unstoppable energy, and he's trapped in their orbit. He finishes setting the last tripwire, stands, and flexes his fingers to release the tension in his knuckles. "We should find some rest before they arrive," he suggests. "Even a few minutes could help." Selis rakes him with a sidelong glance, her eyes drifting over his chest and the newly donned cloak. She steps closer, eyes gleaming with challenge. "Rest? Good idea, but you're forgetting something." Rylan tilts his head warily. "What's that?" Her grin widens, a hint of feral hunger in the curve of her lips. "You were captured by Kael'ari. You haven't yet been claimed by me." Kael'ari's posture stiffens, and she slides off the column, landing with predatory grace. "He's not yours to claim." Selis rolls her shoulders. "He's not yours either." Rylan stands very still, pulse pounding. This is a different kind of confrontation. The raw tension saturates the air, swirling with unspoken desire and the leftover adrenaline from battle. Selis prowls toward him, each step measured. Kael'ari flanks from the other side, eyes gleaming like molten emerald. He's caught between them, aware that these two might tear him apart or devour him in a wave of unstoppable passion. A question flickers through his mind. Do they even care if he consents, or is it the thrill of conquest that drives them? He squares his shoulders, deciding that if he has any control, it's going to be on his terms. "I'm nobody's property," he says, voice low, warning threaded into every syllable. Selis smirks, halting a foot away. The heat radiating from her body contradicts the sub-zero temperature of the chamber. "You say that, but you're still here, soldier." Kael'ari steps in behind him. He feels her presence before she speaks. an electric tingle crawling across his spine. "We could fight over you right now, draw blood on these cold floors. Is that what you want?" Rylan's breath comes shorter, and he knows the next words he speaks might change everything. "You can fight over me," he says slowly, "or you can accept that I have a say in how this goes." Selis's laughter is a dark hum. She slides a hand up his chest, testing the firmness of his muscles. He talks like he's in charge. Kael'ari's hand presses against his lower back, her breath warm against his ear. "Maybe we should see how much he can handle." Rylan's nerves jolt. This is reckless. There's still an enemy force bearing down, yet the tension in the room crackles so intensely it demands resolution. Every fiber of him is on edge. He spins, stepping out of their immediate grasp, his feet braced on the cold metal floor. He's not naive. If he shows weakness, they'll devour him. He has to meet them on equal footing. Part of him is stunned that he's even considering what's about to happen. But survival in extremes forges strange bonds. Desire flares bright under the shadow of possible death. Selis moves first, crossing the space in a heartbeat. Her fingers latch onto his cloak, yanking him closer. He feels the press of her body, the leather and metal of her armor distinct, the curves and planes of her shape. Her mouth hovers near his, her breath a rush against his lips. She doesn't kiss him immediately, just teases, a low growl reverberating in her throat. The savage need in her eyes is enthralling, a challenge. Kael'ari isn't idle. She steps around, tangling her fingers in Rylan's hair, tugging his head back just enough to expose his throat. He hears the slight hiss of her breath. "Selis," she murmurs, voice vibrating with tension, "don't get greedy." Selis's laugh is husky. "Afraid I'll break him?" "Afraid you'll break him before I get my turn," Kael'ari corrects, sliding her free hand down Rylan's arm. The contact is electrifying, sparks dancing across his skin. He bites back a gasp, refusing to show too much vulnerability, but the sensation is potent. Selis leans in and kisses him, hard. It's not gentle or tender. It's a clash of wills. Her teeth nipping his lower lip until he tastes blood. He groans, pushing back against her, refusing to be just a toy. She growls her approval, tangling her hands in his dreadlocks, the tension sweet agony. Then Kael'ari yanks him away, capturing, his mouth in a kiss that's no less fierce, though it has a different quality, calculated, deep and searching. A low, pulsing current thrums from her skin into his, making every nerve tingle. They're both on him, pressing, pulling, challenging each other through him. Their eyes lock over his shoulders, each daring the other to back off. Every breath. Rylan takes his laced with the dual fragrances of their bodies. Selis's spicy wild scent, Kael'ari's cool electric tang. The intensity is overwhelming. This is a dance on the edge of a blade, fueled by the knowledge that any of them could die in the next battle. Selis's hand snakes under his cloak, sliding across his abdomen, the warmth of her palm stoking the embers inside him. Kael'ari grips his hair tighter, forcing his head to tilt so she can nip the line of his jaw. His heart thunders, adrenaline from the fight, morphing into a different kind of battle. He braces his hand on Selis's hip, feeling the press of a metal plate there. She snarls softly in approval. They shift, bodies tangling, stumbling back until Rylan's shoulders meet cold metal. He grits his teeth, letting out a strangled sound as Kael'ari's hand finds him, nails scraping lightly down his chest. Every inch of him is alive with sensation, torn between two unstoppable forces. Selis murmurs something in an alien dialect, eyes glazed with heated fury lust. Kael'ari answers in the same tongue, a mocking retort. He doesn't need a translation to know they're still fighting even now, battling to see who can push him the farthest, stake the stronger claim. His breath rasps in his throat as Selis's lips move down the side of his neck, sharp teeth scraping. He can't contain a groan at the way her body molds to his. Kael'ari runs her fingers over his torso, each caress laced with that near-electric pulse. He clutches at Kael'ari's waist, fingers digging into the supple leather that encases. She gives a soft gasp, and it's the first time he's heard her sound anything less than utterly in control. Time blurs. There's heat, cold, metal, breath, skin. Selis's blade clatters to the ground at some point, dislodged from her belt in the frenzy of limbs. Kael'ari's braces clang against the floor as she discards them, perhaps to feel him more intimately. Rylan tries to maintain a shred of composure, but the rising wave of desire is impossible to quell. Every time he thinks one of them might relent, the other surges forward, claiming more. They press him between them, a constant back and forth of lips, hands, raw friction. He bites back a moan, noticing how the tension that once divided the two alien women is somehow coalescing in this moment, forging a twisted alliance of lust. They're using him as the battlefield, a living stage for their war of dominance. And yet, he's not powerless. He moves with them, answers their ferocity with his own. He's no docile captive. If they want him, they'll get the soldier in. Him too, the lethal survivor who's fought his way out of every impossible scenario. Selis slips out of part of her armor, metal plates hitting the ground. She presses herself closer, hair a vivid cascade of red across his chest. Kael'ari's breath is ragged, her eyes flickering that deep emerald until they almost glow. The power humming beneath her skin intensifies, a heated vibration that makes Rylan's pulse race. He wonders fleetingly if it's dangerous, but the question dissolves when her hands slide lower, urging him further into their shared chaos. At some point, he's lost track of where the floor is versus the walls. They sink to the ground amidst the rubble. The only illumination, the dim emergency lights overhead. Selis hooks a leg around him, her muscles like steel pulling him in. Kael'ari's fingers knot in his hair again, pulling his mouth to hers, devouring him. His senses drown in the twin assault, the swirl of Selis's lips at his throat and Kael'ari's tongue exploring his mouth. His entire body throbs with need. They strip away the last barriers between them, breath hissing through clenched teeth as skin meets alien skin. Selis is scorching, Kael'ari an electric storm. Their combined heat sears Rylan's blood. He barely notices the cold of the metal floor anymore. Their moans echo in the enclosed space, overlapping with his own. The urgency is brutal, a collision of three unstoppable forces. This is no gentle union, it's a fight for supremacy in the realm of pleasure. Kael'ari rakes her nails across Selis's back as she shifts to claim Rylan's mouth again. Selis hisses in a mix of anger and desire, biting down on Rylan's shoulder just enough to mark him, drawing a gasp. He grabs Selis's hip, pressing her firmly against him, an unspoken declaration that he won't be overshadowed. She growls, her eyes blazing gold. The friction of their bodies becomes an unbearable pressure, building higher with each ragged breath. Kael'ari's hair brushes Rylan's cheek as she leans down, her silver-white locks contrasting with Selis's flame-red tangling together. He feels caught in a maelstrom, hammered by wave after wave of sensation. Kael'ari's lips travel, his jaw, his neck, while Selis's nails score his back. There's a fleeting sting of pain that only intensifies the desire thrumming in his veins. Their voices blend in guttural gasps and muttered curses. He can't tell whose voice is whose anymore. It's all a feral cacophony. His vision blurs around the edges as he arches against them, not caring that at any moment an enemy might burst into the chamber. The possibility of danger only heightens the desperation. They clutch at him, at each other, tangling in limbs, sweat and half-broken armor. Time loses meaning. All that remains is the raw struggle to reach a peak that looms just out of reach. Selis's eyes lock on Kael'ari's, and for one breathless moment they work in unison, driving Rylan to the brink. His muscles strain, and he lets out a guttural sound, his mind fracturing under the onslaught of sensation. When it happens, it's explosive, a detonation of pleasure that seems to shatter every nerve. He hears the two women cry out, the echoes of their voices harmonizing in a savage crescendo. His own roar mingles with theirs, reverberating off the metal walls. It's a violent, primal completion, not the gentle culmination of tender romance, but the raw explosion of tension and lust that's been building since the moment they crossed paths. For a few heartbeats afterward, none of them move, locked in a panting, trembling heap of exhausted bodies. The chill of the air returns, a stark reminder of where they are. Rylan's chest heaves, arms quivering from exertion. Selis's fingers twitch against his side, and Kael'ari's breath rasps by his ear. He's consumed by a heady mixture of triumph, fatigue, and a haunting sense of foreboding. They disentangle slowly, each reclaiming a semblance of distance. Selis stands first, pulling her armor back into place with jerky, irritated movements, as though annoyed by her own vulnerability. Kael'ari smooths her hair, eyes lingering on Rylan with an unreadable expression. There's no softness in her gaze, just a simmering satisfaction overlaid with the ever-present readiness for war. Rylan sits up, dragging in gulps of cold air. The floor beneath him is unforgiving, and bruises are already forming on his skin from their aggressive encounter. But he's alive, every fiber pulsing with energy. He looks at them both, noticing they're turned in opposite directions, as if they can't bear to meet each other's eyes just yet. Finally, Selis breaks the silence, her voice rough. That doesn't change anything. I still plan to kill you one day, Kael'ari. Kael'ari chuckles, a dark sound. You can certainly try, but not today. We've got bigger problems. There's a crash outside, a distant echo of metal on metal followed by shouting. Rylan tenses, forcing himself onto his feet, ignoring the ache in his legs. He meets Selis's eyes. She nods, the battle lust rekindled. Kael'ari grabs her braces and slides them on, electricity crackling faintly. They hurry to the corridor, finding the improvised barricade still intact but battered. Something slammed into them. The sensor console in the corner flickers with warnings, indicating life signatures close by. Rylan checks the readout. They're here. Selis's grin is savage, as if the near certainty of another fight is exactly what she needs to burn away the lingering vulnerability. Good. I'm not done yet. Kael'ari glances back at Rylan. No time to recover. You ready? He flexes his hands, rolling his shoulders. He's drained, but fueled by the surge of post-intimacy adrenaline. Let them come. Gunfire erupts, energy bolts whizzing through the corridor. Selis yells for cover, diving behind the barricade. Kael'ari unleashes an energy blast that crackles with lethal force, forcing the intruders to scatter. Rylan slides in beside Selis, raising the plasma pistol he salvaged. He peeks over the barricade, sights on the dark silhouettes moving through the half-collapsed doorway. He fires, nailing one soldier, then ducks. Kael'ari's blasts roar, shaking the floor. Sparks rain down. Selis leaps over the barricade, slashing at a soldier who gets too close. Rylan watches her fight, the lethal dance of her plasma blade almost mesmerizing. Kael'ari moves in tandem, releasing arcs of destructive light from her braces. The corridor becomes a kill zone. Rylan covers them with precise shots, each bolt finding a target or forcing an enemy to seek cover. Selis sprints through the carnage, cutting down stragglers. Kael'ari meets the brunt of the squad, each wave of her power pushing them back, until their screams echo off the walls. But there are more of them. Rylan's pistol whines as its charge runs low. He curses, scanning for an alternative. A soldier rushes the barricade, brandishing a serrated blade. Rylan blocks with his forearm, feeling the slice tear at his skin. He grits his teeth, knocking the attacker's weapon aside and slamming a fist into the soldier's jaw. The soldier staggers, and Rylan fires a final bolt into his chest. Kael'ari flings an energy wave down the corridor, sending a handful of men crashing into the far wall. They slump, not moving. She pants, her power evidently draining her strength. Selis stands among fallen enemies, blade dripping. Despite their formidable skills, more footsteps echo from behind the corridor. "They just keep coming," Rylan says between breaths. Kael'ari's eyes narrow. "We need to seal this place." Selis scowls, blood trickling from a minor cut on her cheek. "Then let's do it." Rylan drops behind the barricade, rummaging for the improvised charges he created. He sets the triggers, adjusts the timers. "We can collapse the entrance, but we have to be on the other side or we'll trap ourselves." Selis clenches her teeth. "We'll punch through them." She glances at Kael'ari. "You have enough left to blast another path?" Kael'ari summons a spark in her palm, though it sputters. "Maybe. Let's try." They advance, the swirl of cold air, mixing with the stench of blood and sweat. Rylan flings a charge down the corridor, counting to 2 before it detonates, spraying chunks of metal and debris in a shower. Screams follow. He tosses another, forcing the next wave to retreat momentarily. Kael'ari then hurls a concentrated pulse that collapses part of the corridor. A massive hunk of ceiling smashes down, sealing half the attackers away. Screeches of anguish echo from beyond. Selis roars, vaulting over the broken floor, finishing off any enemies still trapped on. This side. Rylan shoulders the half-depleted rifle from one of the fallen and fires at a straggling soldier who tries to raise a sidearm. The soldier drops, and for a heartbeat silence reigns, save for the settling rubble. Kael'ari checks the readout on the console. "They're still out there, but we've bought time. The corridor is blocked." She sways slightly, catching herself against the wall. "I need a moment to recharge." Selis stands amid the carnage, chest heaving. Her gaze sweeps the hall, flicking between Rylan and Kael'ari. "We can't stay. They'll find another way in." Rylan's mind races. They need a route out of here before the entire area is overrun. He quickly reconsiders the partially frozen sublevel. "Wait, maybe we can melt through the ice and find a passage. If it's an abandoned base, there could be a tunnel system connected to the surface beyond the valley." Kael'ari straightens, pushing off the wall, summoning enough composure to nod. "Then let's do it. I'll direct my energy at the ice. Selis, you guard our backs." Rylan leads the way to the sub-level entrance, the door Selis kicked open earlier. They pick their way down a flight of rickety stairs. Icy water drips from the ceiling. A thick sheet of ice coats the corridor ahead, shimmering in the glow of Kael'ari's orb. Selis sets up near the entrance, blade in hand, watching for any pursuers. Rylan stands back as Kael'ari steps up to the ice wall, pressing her hands against it. Her eyes flare emerald. A low hum resonates through the corridor. Heat radiates from her palms, steam rising as the ice hisses and melts. The water runs off in rivulets, revealing more metallic framework beneath. She gasps with the effort, veins standing out on her neck, but slowly a tunnel takes shape, carved by her power. A distant explosion shakes the base, debris clattering. From above, Rylan curses. He can hear more soldiers converging, shouting orders in their language. Selis clenches her teeth, glancing over her shoulder. "Faster would be nice," she mutters. Kael'ari pushes harder. The ice melts in a rapid cascade, sending steaming water flooding across the floor. At last, a gap big enough for them to slip through emerges. She staggers back, half collapsing into Rylan's arms, her breath ragged. He steadies her, feeling her body trembling from the exertion. Her skin is slick with sweat, the greenish hue, a shade paler than before. "Go," Kael'ari manages, voice rasping. "I'll make it." Selis helps lift Kael'ari, hooking an arm around her. Together, the three of them hurry into the newly opened passage. The corridor is dark and partially collapsed in places, but with the emergency lights behind them and the glow of Kael'ari's orb, they can see well enough to move. The sound of pursuit echoes from the upper level. Soldiers clang against the barricades, searching for a route. The corridor dips downward before sloping up again. It's a labyrinth of old pipes, broken beams, and ice-filled cracks. Selis leads the way with predatory focus, stepping over obstacles with sure-footed grace. Rylan supports Kael'ari, who recovers slowly, color returning to her face. His own. Mind spins, exhaustion tugging at the edges of his consciousness, but he shoves it away. They have to keep moving. Eventually they find a rusted hatch that leads to another subchamber. Rylan forces it open with a shoulder, nearly losing his footing on the slick ground. The space inside is a claustrophobic shaft with a ladder extending up into darkness. Selis glances at him, then at Kael'ari. Let's see where it leads. She climbs first, her lithe body vanishing into the gloom. Kael'ari goes next, mustering enough strength to climb on her own. Rylan follows, the rung freezing against his palms. The climb is arduous. He can hear water dripping, echoing in the tight space. Eventually, Selis calls down from above. There's an opening, but it's sealed from the outside. Kael'ari mutters a curse, pausing on the ladder. Rylan positions himself on a rung below her. We can blow it, he suggests, but we have limited charges left. Selis's voice echoes, stand back. A second later, there's a muffled thump, and the entire shaft reverberates. Dust rains down on them, and the ladder shakes so violently that Rylan nearly loses his grip. Kael'ari curses sharply, bracing herself against the wall. Above, the outline of daylight appears, a faint glow filtering down. Selis's silhouette slides out of view. Kael'ari climbs faster now, with renewed determination. Rylan follows, each rung bringing him closer to the promise of open air. When he emerges, he finds Selis standing at the edge of a ragged hole in the ground, scanning the horizon. They're now on a rocky outcrop on the far side of the valley, the walls of ice towering in the distance. The fresh air hits Rylan like a jolt. He looks around, half expecting a wave of soldiers to be waiting, but the area is eerily quiet. Kael'ari exhales, leaning against a boulder. Her gaze sweeps the sky. The faint hum of Fresier cruisers resonates from somewhere to the west, but it's not as close as before. We might have lost them for the moment, she says, relief coloring her tone. Selis brushes rubble off her clothes, rolling her shoulders. Her red hair flies wildly in the wind. We can't stay here. They'll scan for us again. Rylan nods. We need a ship or a place to call for extraction. Kael'ari's face darkens. My vessel crashed. That's how I ended up trekking across this cursed planet with you. It's miles away and likely compromised. Selis sighs. Mine is hidden but not nearby. We'd have to cross the open. Plains and the Fresier control the skies. For a moment they stand in the freezing wind, each lost in their own battle plan. Finally, Selis turns to Rylan. You must have had a ship or a squad before you ended up in Kael'ari's clutches. He sets his jaw. Had a small cruiser, but it was destroyed when we were ambushed. It's salvageable only as scrap. Kael'ari's lips thin, her exhaustion evident. She regards Rylan with a new intensity, something beyond mere lust or rivalry. Then we'll have to find another way off this rock, perhaps a Fresier shuttle if we can hijack one. Selis snorts. Bold plan. I like it. They move on, picking their way across the rugged terrain, using the ridges and rocks as cover. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the icy wasteland. Rylan's muscles ache, and the ghost of that explosive encounter in the base lingers on his skin. He can still feel the phantom touches, the bruises, the sting of claws and bites. Neither Kael'ari nor Selis brings it up, but the charged glances they occasionally throw each other speak volumes. Darkness falls quickly in this harsh environment. The temperature plummets further. They find partial shelter in a shallow alcove, enough to shield them from the relentless wind. Selis starts a small fire, using a fusion igniter from her belt, and Kael'ari collapses onto a rocky ledge, staring out at the swirling snow. Rylan lowers himself by the flames, grateful for the flicker of warmth. Selis sits opposite, the firelight, dancing across her sharp features, highlighting the dried blood smudged on her cheeks. Kael'ari eventually joins them, silent, lost in thought. After a while, Rylan breaks the quiet. "Who are the Frasier to you, exactly? And why are you both so intent on avoiding them, rather than facing them head-on?" Kael'ari's gaze flickers in the firelight. They're a coalition of warlords who banded together to dominate this sector. A plague of locusts, devouring everything in their path. They'll unify just long enough to strip worlds of resources, then turn on each other. She toys with a loose strand of her hair. "I prefer not to get caught in that net." Selis stares into the flames. "We've all done our share of conquering. Some of us more elegantly than others," she says, shooting a mocking glance at Kael'ari. "But the Frasier have grown too big, too organized. They're an empire in all but name." Rylan nods grimly. "I was sent to gather intel on them, to see if there was any hope of forging an alliance against them. Got too close, evidently." Kael'ari meets his eyes. "You should have known better than to let yourself be caught." A ghost of a smirk touches his lips. "I've learned my lesson." Selis snickers. "Not soon enough." Silence. Stretches again, the crackle of the small fire a pitiful shield against the vast cold. Rylan finds himself thinking about how improbable this alliance is. Two deadly alien queens who want to kill each other, temporarily working together with him in the middle. And in that middle ground, something explosive has already happened, something that might shift all their fates. He can't tell if it was a mistake or a moment of clarity, but he does know that the tension between them hasn't abated. If anything, it's grown. Kael'ari finally stirs, rising to her feet. "We should rest in shifts. I'll keep first watch." Without waiting for a response, she steps to the edge of the alcove, arms crossed, scanning the horizon. Selis watches her go, then leans back against the rock wall. She angles her head toward Rylan. "Still think you're not property?" He arches a brow. "I'm nobody's property." She regards him for a moment, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Sure, keep telling yourself that." She closes her eyes, arms resting on her knees, but Rylan can tell she's not fully relaxed. The woman likely sleeps with one eye open. He shifts, letting the weariness overtake him. His eyelids droop. The crackle of the fire lulls him, despite the cold seeping into his bones. Before sleep claims him, he glances once more at Kael'ari's silhouette against the starry sky. Somewhere out there, the Frasier cruisers roam, and further beyond, entire galaxies are entangled in war. He's caught in a dangerous power triangle, but he's never been one to run from a fight, or from the kind of passion that can make a man forget how close death lingers. He dozes off, his dreams filled with stormy skies and the memory of heated skin against his. The rest is short-lived. An hour or two later, Kael'ari gently shakes him awake for his turn at watch. Selis sleeps across the fire, arms folded. Kael'ari's face is unreadable as she passes him, lying down in the spot he vacated. In the dim firelight, he sees a fleeting vulnerability in her expression before she closes her eyes, turning away. From him, he stands at the alcove's edge, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness. His breath plumes white in the freezing air. The night is deadly silent. Ice crystals glint under the faint glow of distant stars. He wonders how he ended up here, chained and stolen by two alien warlords who seem as likely to destroy each other as they are to claim him. And now they're all forced into an uneasy truce by the presence of a far greater enemy. It's the strangest balancing act he's ever had to maintain. Just before dawn, clouds roll in, thick and grey, threatening more snow. Rylan quietly wakes Selis for her shift, though she stirs on her own, eyes snapping open like she was never really asleep. He offers her the rifle, but she pushes it aside. "I prefer to feel them coming," she mutters, tapping the hilt of her blade. "Go sleep." He lowers himself onto the cold ground near Kael'ari. Despite the earlier chaos, or maybe because of it, he slips back into a dreamless sleep. Time passes in flickers of half-awareness. When he opens his eyes again, morning light filters through the swirling clouds, painting the world in a pale wash of white and grey. Kael'ari stands near the now-dead fire, looking out over the tundra. Selis is at the opposite edge of the alcove, eyes narrowed on a distant point. Rylan pushes himself upright, every muscle protesting. The memory of that night in the base resurfaces, a pounding echo in his blood. He clears his throat, trying to focus on practical matters. "We need a plan," Kael'ari nods once. "I've been thinking. The Vrejir will be patrolling the valley heavily now. If we try to cross it, we'll be spotted." Selis's voice carries an edge. "If we stay here, we die. So crossing is our only option, unless you plan to conjure some miracle with your energy." Kael'ari's jaw tenses. "I can't melt an entire valley of ice, and my reserves are already depleted." Rylan interjects. "Is there any chance we can slip past their scanners? Maybe we can create a diversion." Selis laughs darkly. "A diversion would just bring them down on us." Kael'ari's eyes flick with momentary calculation. "Unless it's big enough to draw them away from us entirely." They gather near a rocky outcrop, discussing the possible ways to lure the Vrejir away. Rylan points out that if they rig enough charges, or sabotage one of their cruisers to crash in a different area, the Vrejir might focus their search there. The talk of infiltration sets Selis's bloodthirst alight. Kael'ari eyes Rylan, as if assessing how best to utilize his soldier's skill. They form a rough plan, sneak into the outskirts of the Vrejir's search perimeter, plant a device that mimics a distress beacon or energy signature big enough to draw them, and slip away in the chaos. It's high risk, relying on stealth and a bit of luck, but it's all they have. They pick their way across the frigid terrain, using ridges and gullies to stay hidden. Every so often, a Vrejir shuttle roars overhead, scanning with bright beams that slice through the gloom. Each time, they duck into crevices, hearts pounding. The interplay between Kael'ari and Selis remains prickly, with clipped words and glares, but their cooperation is shockingly smooth when it comes to avoiding detection. Rylan moves with them, a silent partner in their precarious alliance. Yet, every brush of their arms or meeting of their gazes sends a jolt of tension through him. They reach the perimeter by midday. The Vrejir have set up a small outpost, complete with a temporary shield generator, a landing zone for their craft, and patrols. From a vantage point behind a frozen ridge, they spy half a dozen guards, more inside the prefab structures. Kael'ari points to a fuel dump near the edge of the outpost. Large tanks that, if detonated, could create a massive explosion, certainly enough to attract attention. Selis grins. "There's your diversion." Rylan nods. "We have to get close enough to set charges, then we run." Kael'ari's eyes narrow. "We should split up. Selis, you cause a distraction on the far side. Rylan, plant the charges. I'll handle the guards if they get too close." Selis bares her teeth, as if the idea of a frontal distraction suits her perfectly. She spares a glance at Rylan, something akin to a challenge shining in her golden eyes. "Try not to blow yourself up, soldier." He gives a half-smile. "I'll do my best." Selis slips away, circling the outpost to approach from the opposite side. Kael'ari lays a hand on Rylan's arm, leaning in. Her breath warms his ear in the bitter cold. "Be quick. The moment she strikes, they'll be on high alert." Rylan nods, his heart hammering. Memories of her body pressed against his flash in his mind unbidden. He focuses on the mission, The tension in his gut is both excitement and dread. If this fails, they'll be captured or killed. They wait, crouched behind the ice ridge, scanning the uniformed soldiers pacing around. Suddenly, a roar echoes. From the other side of the outpost, a battle cry, followed by the distinct hum of a plasma blade. The patrol shouts in surprise, and gunfire erupts. Selis has engaged them, attacking like a red-haired whirlwind. Chaos breaks out. Kael'ari squeezes Rylan's arm, whispering, "Now." She springs forward, flanking the outpost to pick off stragglers. Rylan darts toward the fuel dump. His boots crunch on ice-laden ground, every step measured to avoid drawing attention. Shouts and blasts ring out, echoing across the outpost. He spots Selis weaving through a cluster of enemies, cutting them down with brutal efficiency. Kael'ari appears, releasing arcs of energy that slam into soldiers trying to flank Selis. Rylan reaches the tanks. Thick metal cylinders stand in rows, connected by hoses. He fishes out the remaining charges from his belt, quickly attaching them to critical valves. His breath clouds in the air, adrenaline spiking as he sets the timers for a short countdown. He can hear more soldiers racing out of the prefab structures, uncertain where to direct their fire. The scene is pure chaos. A guard rounds a corner, sees Rylan. The guard lifts a blaster, finger tightening on the trigger. Rylan lunges, smashing into him, forcing the barrel aside as the shot sizzles harmlessly into the air. They grapple, stumbling over a pile of crates. Rylan slams an elbow into the guard's jaw, feeling bone crack. The guard drops, and Rylan rips away, ignoring the throbbing pain in his own side. He arms the last charge. The console beeps with a quiet confirmation. 30 seconds, that's all the time they have. Rylan bolts, spotting Kael'ari near a stack of crates, unleashing a final surge of power that scatters a group of soldiers. She sees him wave, nods, and sprints in his direction. Across the yard, Selis impales one of the last guards, yanks her blade free, and spins to run as well. Together, they flee the outpost, darting behind the ice ridge. A handful of soldiers try to give chase. Selis whirls, hurling a throwing knife that lodges in one man's throat, buying them precious seconds. Then an almighty explosion detonates. Behind them, the force knocks them off their feet, a deafening roar that echoes across the tundra. Flames surge into the sky, and a shockwave blasts outward, sending chunks of debris raining down. Rylan lands hard, wind knocked out of him. He scrambles to his knees, dusted with snow and ash, blinking away the dizziness. Selis coughs nearby, brushing shards of ice from her hair. Kael'ari staggers up, green skin smudged with soot. The outpost is now a raging inferno. Soldiers sprint around in disarray, some consumed by the fire, others trying to rescue equipment. A few gunships circle overhead, their searchlights fixated on the explosion. It's exactly the distraction they needed. They run. In the confusion, no one notices them slip away, hugging the ridgeline, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the chaos. Rylan's lungs burn, each breath a raspy gasp. Selis pushes forward, relentless, while Kael'ari brings up the rear, scanning for any sign of pursuit. At last, they crest a hill. Below, a wide, frozen river stretches toward another range of mountains. The sun is low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Rylan collapses behind a cluster of boulders, panting. Selis leans on a rock, wincing at a gash on her forearm. Kael'ari joins them, eyes flicking back to the wall of smoke rising in the distance. "That should keep them busy," Kael'ari says breathlessly. Selis allows a tight grin. "And we're alive. For now." Rylan focuses on binding Selis's wound with a strip of cloth, ignoring her grumbles. Kael'ari watches, her expression unreadable. The hush that follows is heavy with the unspoken truth. They may have escaped the immediate threat, but the war is far from over. Their alliance is temporary, born of necessity. Yet beneath the caution and mistrust is a magnetic pull they can't deny As the blazing sky dims into night, they huddle for warmth in a makeshift shelter of stone, battered by the icy winds. Rylan keeps watch this time, letting the two alien rivals snatch what rest they can. He can't help but reflect on the improbable bond forming among them. Desire and rivalry, survival and conquest, an explosive mixture that has already ignited. Will it tear them apart, or will it forge something stronger? He doesn't know. But as he gazes at the two sleeping warlords, each curled in her own corner, he senses that the next time their passions collide, it won't be any gentler. It'll be another raw, unstoppable force, and he's not sure if the planet beneath their feet will survive the quake. By dawn, they awaken stiff, bruised, but determined to press on. Selis scowls at the pinkish light streaking the sky. "We have to find my ship. If it's still intact, we can punch through their blockade. But it's a ways off." Kael'ari crosses her arms. "And here I thought you wanted to do everything on foot." Selis glares, but Rylan steps in, voice grim. "We don't have many options. Let's do it." They set off, the memory of the outpost's explosion, a lingering reminder of how precarious their situation is. Yet each step forward cements their uneasy partnership. They push across the frozen river, scale craggy hills, and sneak past more patrols. The planet's weather intensifies, bringing a howling blizzard that almost blinds them, but which also hides them from aerial scans. Days bleed together in this arduous journey. They survive by rationing stolen supplies and taking shifts to melt ice into water. At night, huddled in caves or under overhangs, the tension between them throbs. Sometimes in the darkness, Rylan swears he sees Selis eyeing Kael'ari as though tempted to resume their fight, and possibly more. Kael'ari's gaze often drifts to him, her eyes shifting emerald, but exhaustion and the ever-present threat of the Frisier keep them from repeating that explosive triad of passion. Finally, they crest a ridgeline overlooking a deep valley. Beneath swirling snow, Rylan spots the shape of a craft, partially camouflaged under netting and ice. It's not large, probably a sleek vessel suited for infiltration or swift raids. Selis exhales a visible breath, relief flickering in her stance. Still there, they scramble down the slope, slipping and sliding on the icy rocks. The Frisier presence here seems minimal, likely because of the intense blizzard. Selis rushes to the craft, frantically brushing away the snow and camouflage. Kael'ari helps, though she's careful to keep one eye on their surroundings. Rylan circles the perimeter, scanning for traps or hidden watchers. Seeing none, he jogs back to the ship, where Selis has managed to unseal the hatch. "Get inside," Selis orders, yanking the door open. They clamber into the cramped interior. The cockpit is small, with 2 seats in front, 1 behind. The walls bristle with alien instrumentation. Rylan notices that the design is savage yet functional. Fanged motifs carved into the metal, red lighting along the consoles. Selis powers the systems, cursing when the engine sputters. She slams a fist on the console, then tries again. This time the ship hums to life, lights flickering on. Kael'ari sags against a bulkhead, exhaustion flooding her features. Rylan helps secure the hatch, scanning the interior for damage. "Engines look operational," he says, "but we'll have to see if we can break orbit without drawing the entire Frisier fleet on us." Selis grits her teeth. "I have a few stealth countermeasures, but it won't hold against a blockade for long. We'll need a jump point out of this system." Kael'ari nods, forcing herself to stand. "Then let's go. I'd rather die in the void than freeze here." Selis takes the pilot's seat, flicking switches. The engines growl, vibrating the deck plates. Kael'ari drops into the co-pilot seat, quickly running scans for Frisier interceptors. Rylan straps himself into the seat behind them, adrenaline coursing. After all their time on this wretched ice world, they're finally making a bid for freedom. Selis eases the ship off the ground, snow swirling in a white vortex around them. Visibility is almost nil, but she navigates with savage confidence, guiding the craft through the storm. They climb higher, the buffeting winds rocking them violently, but the ship holds together. Rylan grips the edges of his seat, knuckles white. At last they break the storm's upper layer, emerging into clearer skies. Kael'ari barks warnings as the sensors pick up multiple signals. Fresier gunships on patrol. Selis curses and throws, the throttle wide open. The craft surges forward, streaking across the sky in a blur. Rylan peers at the sensor screen over Kael'ari's shoulder, watching enemy blips converge. "The stealth measures?" Rylan asks. Selis flips a switch. The lights flicker, and the sensor readout fuzzes. "We'll be invisible to them for a few minutes if they don't get a visual lock." Alarm klaxons buzz as one of the cruisers looms ahead. Kael'ari sucks in a breath. They're scanning wide. "We have to dive below them, or we'll be caught in their net." Selis yanks the controls, dropping them into a sudden plunge that makes Rylan's stomach lurch. They skirt the underbelly of the cruiser, nearly brushing its hull. Kael'ari curses in a language Rylan doesn't understand. Somehow, they scrape past without setting off the direct alarms. Then Selis guns the engines again, pitching them up and away. The planet's curvature falls beneath them, the ice fields shrinking. Into the distance, the blackness of space beckons overhead. Rylan feels the shift in gravity as they blast past the upper atmosphere, trembling violently. The hull groans. Once they clear the final atmospheric layer, the shaking subsides, replaced by the hum of life support and the beep of sensors. Kael'ari exhales, scanning the readouts. "We're not safe yet. Fresier capital ships are in orbit." Rylan leans forward. "Look for a gap in their formation. We just need enough time to hit light speed." Selis glances at Kael'ari. "Any bright ideas, O cunning warlord?" Kael'ari sets her jaw, tapping rapidly at the controls to jam the enemy's sensors. "Head for that debris field near the second moon. We can use it for cover." The craft accelerates, weaving between the massive silhouettes of Fresier battleships. Lights flash on their hulls, cannons swiveling, but apparently the stealth field holds for now. Selis pushes, the engines to the limit. The small ship zips into the partial cover of drifting rocks and wreckage. A hush falls as they float behind a fragment of what appears to be a destroyed cruiser. Kael'ari scans again. They're close, but no direct lock. "We have maybe 20 seconds before they triangulate us." Selis slams a button, powering the FTL drive. "We jump now or never." Rylan braces himself. "Do it!" The engine whine climbs to a deafening pitch, and the stars in the viewport stretch into elongated lines. For a split second, Rylan worries the Fresier interceptors will catch them mid-jump, but with a final surge, the craft lurches into faster-than-light travel. The sensor displays blur into a swirl of colored lines, and then they're gone, leaving the icy planet and the Fresier blockade behind. A collective exhale fills the cockpit. Selis eases back in her seat, sweat beading on her forehead. Kael'ari closes her eyes, relief etched in the set of her shoulders. Rylan leans against the wall, heart pounding. They're free, at least for the moment. After a minute, Selis sets the autopilot, letting them drift through hyperspace. Kael'ari rubs her temples, the weariness of their ordeal catching up. Rylan unbuckles, stretching stiff muscles. Silence takes hold, heavy with the weight of what they've just escaped. Selis breaks it, turning in her seat, eyes flitting between them. "We'll need to drop out near the next system. If either of you wants off, that's when we part ways." Kael'ari arches a brow. "So you'll just drop me at the nearest port? That's very generous of you, Selis. Didn't you vow to kill me?" Selis's mouth twists. "Maybe I will, but for now I'm too tired." Kael'ari snorts softly. Then she glances at Rylan. "And you, soldier, you've been dragged halfway across a frozen planet and nearly blown up. Do you have a particular destination in mind?" He rubs the back of his neck, unsure. I was originally on a mission. I suppose I could resume it, or find new orders. But something tells me the Freja threat isn't going away. They'll be after us now. Selis shrugs. Let them come. We'll kill them. Kael'ari regards them both, something odd flickering in her gaze. There's more at stake than any one mission or vendetta. The Freja won't stop. And now we have something that unites us whether we like it or not. Rylan steps closer, standing between the two women. The cockpit is tight, forcing them into close proximity. The memory of that night on the base flares hot in his mind. He notices how both Kael'ari and Selis shift, as though the same memory burns in them too. They eye each other warily, acknowledging the tension they share. He searches their expressions. Do you want to keep running? Because I don't. Selis's eyes ignite with challenge. I never run. Kael'ari lifts her chin. Neither do I. A strained beat of silence. Then Rylan lets out a short laugh. So we stand and fight? Selis's grin is feral. We find allies, build our own force, and crush the Freja. And then, she spares a glare at Kael'ari, you and I settle our debt. Kael'ari's lips twist in a mirthless smile. So be it. She flicks her gaze at Rylan. And you, soldier, ready to fight a war by our side? He considers the question, letting the adrenaline of near-death fade. He thinks of all he's lost, all he's fought for. Then he looks at these two alien queens, each fierce in her own way, bound to him by fate or chance. The rational part of him warns that it's madness, but the warrior part of him roars with a hunger for the challenge and something deeper, more primal, that drew them together in that base. A raw, undeniable bond forged in passion and blood. He nods. I'm in. Selis turns back to the console, inputting new coordinates. Then let's get to a safe harbor first, resupply and gather information. After that, we see who's truly powerful in this galaxy. Kael'ari exhales, tension easing from her shoulders. One war ends, another begins. Rylan rests a hand on the back of Selis's seat, feeling the steady thrum of the engines through the deck. He meets Kael'ari's gaze, then Selis's. We'll need each other, at least until this is done. Their eyes lock in a moment of shared understanding. It won't be a peaceful alliance, nor will it be a gentle romance. They're all too dangerous, too scarred, too full of want and fury. Yet the sparks between them could light the fires that consume the Freja Empire, or each other. For now, that risk is worth it. Selis engages the autopilot for the next jump, the swirling vortex of hyperspace shimmering around them. Kael'ari stands, moving toward the rear cabin, as if to find a moment's respite. Rylan follows, aware that Selis's gaze lingers, heavy with unspoken challenge. They're locked in something bigger than they can fully grasp, a triumvirate of warriors bound by blood, lust, and the promise of revenge. He steps into the narrow corridor with Kael'ari, catching her arm gently. Her eyes flick to his hand, then up to meet his gaze. The tension between them crackles, a reminder of how easily they can ignite. He opens his mouth to speak, but words fail him. Instead, she leans in, pressing a single heated kiss to his lips, then pulls away, her expression still guarded. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. The memory of that first explosive encounter resonates in her stare. Behind them, Selis's voice echoes from the cockpit. Don't get too cozy, she calls. We've got a war to plan. Rylan smirks. Kael'ari turns, stepping into the darkness of the cabin. He stands there a moment longer, heart pounding. Then he heads back to the cockpit, prepared for whatever storm awaits. Selis glances at him, an unreadable look flickering across her fierce features. She doesn't say a word about what happened in the corridor, or about the promise written in the lines of his face. They settle into the jump. The ships hum a steady lull. Each of them dwells on the battles fought and the ones yet to come. The tension remains, coiled tight beneath the surface. They're rivals, they're unlikely allies. They're bound by something none of them can fully define. And as the starlight warps around them, carrying them to the next battlefield, one thing is certain: this is far from over. The war, the passion, the hunger, they've only just begun. The end, when it comes, will either break them or unite them in a final, decisive claim. And maybe, just maybe, there's a victory in that union that none of them could have achieved alone.